Hello everyone, welcome to another Real Reflective Practice. I am Dr. Anjali Pereira, the Disillusioned Medic, and as always, this live stream is about having meaningful discussions and open conversations that we doctors don't often even realise we crave. This isn't ARCP mandatory reflective practice. This isn't don't tell the truth because you might get struck off reflective practice. This is real reflective practice. So say hello to me if you're here. If you're watching from Facebook, please hit that like button. And if you're watching from YouTube, do subscribe to this channel. I hope you're all well. I have had an absolutely crap few days, to be honest, that included my cat being run over, which was heartbreaking, and my daughter being unwell, which sucked. So it's been a bit rough. And so I'm very glad to be here doing something tonight that I love and something that makes me happy. So thank you so much for watching. Our theme for tonight's discussion is interruption, and I will be talking about that a bit later with my guest, Dr. Janak Gunatilleke, who is a doctor turned digital healthcare and applied artificial intelligence expert. He'll be joining me a little bit later, but to kick things off, let's start with an audience reflection as always. This one was sent to me by Stockholm Syndrome survivor. Hi Anjali, I hope you are well. It's a little strange to reach out to you given I don't actually know you personally, but having followed your blog for many years, it makes me feel as if I do in some way. I know you'll certainly understand my current state of mind. I formally handed my resignation from my GP-BTS. I spent 2 years on an OOPC, so for all intents and purposes, I left some time ago. And yet it is so hard to cut the umbilical cord. I experienced a difficult rush of conflicting emotions, some reminiscent of Stockholm Syndrome, along with anxiety and utter fear of being totally adrift and lost. What is it with this strange, compulsive, I hate it but I somehow need it relationship with the NHS? I am now feeling a lot happier about my decision, though I do suffer the occasional bout of regret and sadness. I think the solution is to look forward and not back as much as possible and focus on the future that we can build for ourselves instead of dwelling on what ifs. It is very true that we are so institutionalized that being a doctor becomes a fundamental part of our identity. And it is hard not to feel like you have failed or are giving something up by walking away from the NHS. I think we very much continue to be doctors, whether we work in clinical medicine or not. As always, thanks for your insights, podcasts, and articles. Best, Stockholm Syndrome survivor. Stockholm Syndrome survivor, thank you so much for that lovely long message, and congratulations on handing in your resignation and making this choice for your happiness and for your fulfillment, even in spite of the massive emotional turmoil that it's caused for you. You are so spot on in your description of the hate it but need it relationship with the NHS. I don't think non-medics really understand what that feels like. Certainly when I left medicine, there was this song that I always listened to by Stacey Orrico called Stuck on You. Listen to it, it's a good song. It's about a romantic relationship, but it pretty much describes that conflicted feeling. And yeah, I think maybe part of it is that medicine affects so much of our lives, right? I mean, we work such long hours and then we come home and we work some more for audits or posters or presentations or exams. We don't have time for our family and friends anymore. So we spend all our time with other medics and other people working in the hospitals or surgeries where we are. We don't have time for hobbies anymore. So medicine basically is our hobby. So yeah, it can very much feel, to use your analogy, like medicine is that mother figure, yeah, that umbilical cord that we're dependent on for everything. So I think you've shown a great deal of courage in taking this step. And congrats again, and I wish you every bit of success on your non-clinical journey. And to everyone else, if you would like to send me a reflection, please do. I absolutely love reading and sharing your thoughts. So shoot me an email at dranjalipereira.com. And if you want to make up a pseudonym, then do, or you can ask me to make up one for you. Either way is fine. So now is the part of the show where I tell you a story. And as I mentioned tonight, our theme is interruption. Now, Interruption is classically something that we think of as a bad thing, right? I mean, it's associated with rude behavior. It's not polite to interrupt someone when they're talking, or it's not seen to be polite. Interrupting someone when they're in a flow state of creativity can really kill that creativity. I've definitely had a few bosses in the past who could have done with learning that lesson. And it struck me that as a doctor, I was constantly being interrupted. Whatever task you're doing, you have to kind of get used to the idea that something else will likely come along and take your attention elsewhere. You might be in the middle of clerking a patient and your bleep goes off, and then you have to make the decision whether to answer that right now or not. Or it might be a crash call, at which point obviously you'd be obliged to take it. And we've all been in that position, right, of trying to drink a cup of tea or eat your lunch, but something inevitably happens and we don't get to finish that break. Even if you're a surgeon in the middle of an operation and you've got an unconscious person lying in front of you being sliced open, you still have to be prepared for a junior team member to pop their head around the door and ask you a question. Full disclosure, I was often that junior. And I never really thought about the impact of this interruption on my productivity until people around me began to point out that I am someone who needs adjustment time when I'm moving from one task to another. I am your classic daydreamer. I get really absorbed in a thought or a task, you know, that the faraway look will come into my eyes, and you may have to say my name several times to get my attention. And yeah, when I'm interrupted in that way, which by the way is sometimes very necessary to avoid either catastrophe or tardiness or just to get normal life functioning. But yeah, when I'm interrupted, it takes my brain a little while to pivot. And if you tell me that you need to talk to me and then give me 10 minutes or so to get to a finish point in my work, especially when I'm writing, then I'm fine. But often, to the great chagrin of my loved ones, if you talk to me immediately after interrupting me, you're at risk of receiving vague answers that don't really relate to the question that you asked me, or having to repeat yourself because I'm not really listening. Also of having me change my mind about 10 minutes later when I've actually thought about what it is you just asked. And it got me thinking that dealing with interruption does require a certain amount of brain power. In an urgent situation, it takes a lot of mental energy to immediately move from one train of thought to another, at least it does for me. And you also have to bear in mind that at some point, that previous train of thought will still have to be dealt with. I mean, after all, someone is still going to need to clerk that patient once you've finished answering the crash call. And for me, two things came up when I considered this. And the first was that this is probably one of the reasons why busy days at the hospital felt so draining. I mean, there are 100 reasons why it was draining, but this was probably one of them. And also why by the end of the shift, I was barely able to do more than just flop in front of the TV, watching Scrubs and eating a KFC. And the second thing was that when I was a doctor, I never really appreciated this mental agility that I had developed. The ability to pivot in response to an interruption is a critical skill in entrepreneurship, and it's a skill that I use frequently now in the business world, and in my life in general as well, really. And reflecting on it, I think I might just have medicine to thank for at least part of it, which is deeply ironic because as a doctor, I feared interruption. I felt very stuck in my status quo, and yet the idea of being forced to change gave me such anxiety. So I kind of wish I discovered this insight a little bit sooner, but I'm very excited to explore it further with my guest tonight. Dr. Janak Gunatilleke left clinical practice in 2008 to pursue new horizons in the business and consultancy world. And since then, he's had a varied and seriously impressive career. as well as having held senior exec positions in both large corporates and startup environments. He's the co-founder of Conscient AI, and he is now the CEO of a digital health company called Mindwave Ventures. Janak is also incredibly generous in his desire to help other doctors who are thinking of changing career. So it's absolutely amazing to have him on the show tonight, and I feel very honoured. Janak, welcome.
Hi, Anjali.
Hi, how are you doing?
Not too bad. I'm sorry to hear about the rough couple of days you've had.
Thank you. Yeah, it's good to be here and to be doing this. It definitely cheers me up quite a lot. So thank you for joining me. Janak, it would be great to start, if I may, by asking you, why was it that you left medicine? What were your reasons? And also what you do now as the CEO of a company. If you could tell us a little bit about your day-to-day and what you do.
Sure. I mean, to start off with your first question in terms of why I left medicine, I think it's sort of a deeply personal reason, as it probably is for many of us that leave. For me, it was simply the fact that from a personality point of view, I like a lot of variety in what I do. So I like the ability to sort of be able to do slightly different things over a period of time. And as I sort of got more involved in medicine and as I got into my jobs, what I realized was that medicine was one profession where specialization is a requirement, and in most cases, even if you're a general practitioner, the sort of work you do is quite narrow, and that I didn't really think it fitted with what I wanted to get out of a career in terms of being able to sort of explore different things and sort of do a number of different things. So at that stage, that's the sort of main driver that made me look at other things. And not that I knew what I wanted to do, but I knew that medicine might not be the best option for me personally. So that's the sort of reason that I sort of started to look outside of medicine, and so the main reason I left. So what I do now, as you've already mentioned, so I do my time split sort of mainly across two things really. Most of my time is taken up being CEO of Mindwave. So Mindwave is a digital health technology company based in London. So we work with the NHS, startups, academics within universities to help them design and develop digital health products and services. So we do everything from personal health records to online portals to online resource centers, etc. In my other role, which I'm not as involved as I used to be, is as the co-founder of Conscient AI. So that's a AI technology company that's based out of Sri Lanka, and we work with people that want to use AI to solve business problems. So that doesn't really have a healthcare focus. So a lot of the work we do is mainly around the fields of retail, fashion, and marketing. So that's sort of what I do at the moment.
Wow, I mean, it's amazing. It's really incredible to speak to people who have left medicine and to really see the variety of things that they do, and what's possible when you start thinking differently. And yeah, I definitely identify with your reasons for leaving as well. So our theme tonight is interruption, as you know, and it would be really great to talk a bit about why you chose this theme, and what part interruption played in your decision to leave clinical practice. So yes, why interruption?
Sure. So as I mentioned before, I always had the feeling that medicine might not be the best fit for me for the reasons of the sort of not having that variety. And that's a sort of a feeling that I got towards the end of med school, so third, fourth year, fifth year of med school. But at that stage, I was still learning and I hadn't actually started working. So I wanted to make sure that I actually started working within medicine to, fully experience what it was like and see whether that initial expectation that I had matched the reality on the ground. So when I started medicine, I always sort of had a feeling that it might not be for me in the longer term, but I didn't really know for certain, or I didn't really know what I wanted to do. And I think as you explained before I joined on screen, when you're a junior doctor, I think a lot of your time is, it's very busy when you start your shift until you finish it, and you're always sort of running from one task to another, and it doesn't really give you the time to sort of think about anything else except do your job. And it's the first job for many people, and it's obviously a very important job to do as best as you can. So I think a lot of our effort and time is sort of focused on the job, and then as you mentioned, when you're sort of finished the job, it doesn't really necessarily give you much time or energy to sort of think about much else. So that's sort of where I was in my FI 1 year. I think I always had that feeling at the back of my mind, but I didn't really have the time or space to think or do anything about it. And when I started my FI 2 year, I started rotation in A&E. And that was the time I had to have a procedure on my shoulder. So it was an old injury which has sort of been niggling for a while and sort of flared up, and it was the right time to have that. So from an interruption point of view, it wasn't unplanned. I mean, I knew that I was going to have the procedure, but what wasn't quite planned was the amount of time that I would sort of take off work completely after the procedures. So I didn't expect to be sort of at home for 6 weeks or thereabouts after the procedure. And so that was a sort of the interruption, the sort of event that sort of did two things, I guess. One is gave me some time from the day-to-day hustle and bustle to sort of, just to actually have some time to think. And secondly, because I was sort of removed from the clinical environment, it also gave me an opportunity to almost sort of naturally step back and sort of look at it a little bit from outside, and not be sort of, not do it just by going home for the evening, but take a little bit of time away from that particular environment to sort of think about how things have gone, and my sort of initial thoughts that I had in med school around variety and whether medicine was the right fit. So that's basically how it got started.
No, I'm sorry that you had to, that your recovery didn't go as planned, and that you suffered really more than you expected to. But it is really interesting to hear that was a driving factor in your decision to change career, really. Just like to say hello to some of the people in the chat. Hello, Hannah, welcome. Hi, Sophia. Sophia says, so sorry to hear about your cat. Thank you for finding the time and the strength to come and help us with your much appreciated reflective practice sessions. Oh, thank you, that's really sweet. So, yeah, I'd like to just come back to what you're talking about with interruption, Janak, because it's interesting for me. I also had an interruption when I was leaving medicine. I mean, I had been thinking about it for a while. In the same way you had, you knew that it perhaps wasn't quite right for you. And I think I knew that for a long time too. But during my FY2 year, so it's funny, like the timings in our stories are so similar. I got called up for jury service. And that was about 2 weeks of mostly just sitting around outside the courtroom, waiting to be called for a case. And I look back now and realize the sheer inefficiency of the legal justice system in this country, it actually served me quite well, because it meant that, as you said, all of a sudden your normal life is just put on hold. And for me, I was just sitting there in this tiny room for hours on end with nothing to do but, needlework and think about my life. And I remember sitting there with my little cross stitch, just realizing how miserable I was and how much I hated my job, and how freaking relieved I was actually that I'd been called up for jury service, because it meant that I had 2 weeks away from the hospital. And yeah, at the end of that 2 weeks, that is when I finally sent my resignation letter. So it's interesting because it's not like anything had changed. And similarly for you, it's not like once you'd had the shoulder surgery and you'd had that recovery time, it's not like you had more information about leaving. You know, I didn't have certainty about it, more certainty. I didn't have any more facts really about leaving medicine. It was purely the fact that I was forced to stop my regular life in this, you know, unexpected way. And that was what finally pushed me to make the move. So I'm wondering what you think about why that happens. You know, how does interruption put us in a headspace to make changes in our lives, and how did it really work for you?
Yeah, well, I think at a very, very basic level, it is just about time and having the opportunity to sort of think about stuff and do it in a, I guess, in the context almost of not being maybe tired or maybe sort of unhappy about work. And I think it just puts the whole thinking process in a slightly different context, and it did for me as well. And I think my experience was slightly different from you in the sense that I didn't leave at the end of that period of time. But what it did do is it allowed me to explore options a lot more. I talked to a lot more people. I spent a lot more time finding out what other opportunities could be, and then actually it took me, you know, more than a year afterwards, just purely because I tried a few different things, looked at a few different industries and job opportunities, as well as I wanted to. Because I was at the beginning of my 2 year, I also wanted to I guess make the sensible decision, if that's the right word for it, to leave after finishing FY2, because that was the whole time of MTAS, and which is a interesting system to say the least. So I think I wanted to finish FY2 and sort of plan some activities that actually allowed me to explore some opportunities, because I think it felt like leaving after completing FY2 would be the sensible thing, because, you know, if things didn't quite pan out, you know, it was sort of the right more sort of obvious time to come back to it. So I think for me, it was a combination of just having the luxury of time to think about stuff, and also then to plan ahead rather than necessarily make that decision right now. And I think, you know, so for some people, they probably would make that decision. And I think, and again, it probably comes down to personality to a certain extent as well. I like to plan things, and I'm perhaps a little bit more cautious in certain decisions that I take. So for me, it was important that I sort of didn't feel like I was rushing into it, and I sort of took my time and make that decision. So yeah, I think it's a combination of just the luxury of time, and then, you know, also that slightly different context I think it provides you away from the work environment, which is not the same thing as time. I think just gives you a different perspective on how things have gone, and also like what else is out there.
Absolutely. It's interesting. Do you think that what would you have done if you had never had that time? I mean, because you were thinking that medicine perhaps wasn't right for you even before that surgery happened. So do you think you would still have left? Would it have taken you longer to leave? Would you have spent a bit more time as a doctor? I know this is, you can't say anything for certain because
Sure.
you know, it's all speculation, but what do you think would have happened to you career-wise if you had never had that time?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and it's something that I have thought about. I think it's a tricky one, right? Because I think if once you get past a certain seniority in medicine, you know, life, you know, you get on in life as well in terms of, you know, relationships, family, the mortgage, and all of that kind of thing. Which I think what that means, or at least what I found that meant to sort of friends and colleagues that I've spoken to since I've left, is I think the longer you sort of almost leave it, or the later the decision is, the more difficult it becomes, because it becomes not just a sort of a professional decision, but it also, there's financial decision, and there's a lot more sort of emotion attached to sort of the risk that you might take of, what if, or what if it all goes wrong. So I think from that perspective, it's a hard one to call, because you don't know. I think I probably would have left. I think I probably would have taken longer to leave, because I think that interruption really did give me the time to really get my thoughts together. And as I say, the decision was always going to be a little bit more cautious and a little bit more sort of planned out. But so therefore, I think I would have left, but it would have taken longer.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting to think about the what if. I think about if that jury service had never happened, and I think probably I would have just burnt out. I think I was already becoming quite burnt out at that stage, and really my mental health was very much suffering at that point. And I think what the interruption gave me was a kind of reality check of things are not okay, and it kind of opened my eyes really to my state of health at that point. And I think perhaps, can't say for sure, but perhaps if I had not had that, I would have just carried on down this very unhealthy path until my health gave out, and I was literally forced to stop and quit under very different circumstances from the circumstances I did end up quitting under. So yeah, it's really strange to think about it in those terms, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think to your point, it's in hindsight, it's always a wonderful thing. But I think it's always good if you can make these decisions on your own terms and your own timings, rather than being forced to make a decision because you fall sick or something goes horribly wrong. So I think that's that's I guess one of the lessons that I've learned as well, in the sense that I think it's always important to make time to check out a little bit and sort of have a little bit of time to think about how things are going and where do you want things to go, and on a continual basis, because things change, and as you were talking about, things are constantly evolving, especially sort of in the commercial or business world. Things change all the time, and you have to sort of change with it. So sort of to thrive in that environment, you do have to sort of constantly think about how things are going and evaluate that. So I think it's important to make time for those interruptions, but those interruptions on your term, and probably not call an interruption in that context, but take the time out to think about how things are and where you want to go and how things are going with your current work.
Absolutely. I've got a comment coming through from Sophia saying, it's interesting to note that these forced interruptions were beneficial in that they allow us to step back and reassess things from a new perspective, ones that we would not be able to assess under other circumstances. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, for me, I think something that I now know about myself in relation to these forced interruptions is that I am really, really good at distracting myself. I'm happiest when I'm busy, busy without being overwhelmed. It's probably a caveat that I should add. And when something bad happens to me, often my way of dealing with it, after that initial period of grief or sadness or whatever, my way is just to keep being busy. Because that means I can distract myself away from the thing that's causing me pain or anxiety or distress. And it's strange to think about that now, actually, in the wake of my cat dying, because that is exactly what I'm doing right now. I'm keeping busy, and in many ways that is very healing. But I do think I have to be really careful to make sure I don't do that so much that I'm sweeping problems under the rug, to fester and not facing them head on, not dealing with them. And I still don't get the balance right sometimes. And yeah, when I think back to the jury service, when my busyness was taken away from me, I was forced to confront a truth that I'd been pushing to the back of my mind for a very long time. And I was forced to realize, as I said, how unhappy my life as a doctor was making me, and how much more I wanted from life, and how much really I'd been suppressing those emotions. So yeah, I guess in some ways that kind of interruption serves to almost save us from ourselves. If you know what I mean.
Yeah, and I think one of the other things as well, probably with those kind of interruptions where you haven't really planned it, or you haven't quite planned it in that particular way. I think those things are in a way easier to deal with, because I think sometimes you almost feel guilty about taking time off to have a think, or if you're taking time off, you think, oh, I should take time off to go on holiday or spend with family or friends, etc. So I think taking the time off for yourself and to think about these things is quite a tough decision, I think, to take consciously. So I think in a way, when something's almost forced upon you, and you're in a position to sort of make the best of it, then I think in a way it takes away that decision of having to have made that decision in the first place to take that time off for yourself. But I think, so I think that's something I think about what sort of happened, and maybe it's similar to what happened to you with jury service, because it's one of those things that's almost forced upon us, and it's saying, okay, it's happened, so you don't have to feel guilty about it or anything like that. Whereas I think if you took 2 weeks off to think about career, it's quite a different decision, and I think that's quite a difficult decision to take. Because it's people don't necessarily do that, right? You take 2 weeks off to go on holiday or spend with family, or so I think there's that angle to think about as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That is so spot on. It's an excuse. It's a very much, it was a wanted excuse, a very much needed excuse, but I needed an excuse to have that time. And it's funny now, because now I'm so much more cognizant of these things, and obviously I'm a coach, and so this is my area, and so I will take time if I feel it's necessary. I will take time to rethink, specifically make time, and say to people that that's what I'm doing. But certainly as a doctor, and I think perhaps because I was younger and less experienced in the working world as well, that probably played into it too. But no, it's exactly as you said. I didn't feel I had the right to take the time, or that it would have been seen as somewhat odd to have a 2-week sabbatical to think about my life. So yeah, no, it's interesting thinking about that now, and interesting thinking about it in terms of what's happening in the world right now, because in many ways this is a very timely discussion. That the whole world has experienced this major interruption this year, because COVID-19 has obviously impacted the entire globe, and really steamrolled our status quo. And I think there perhaps seems to be two sides to it. On one hand, there's sort of the destruction element, the pain and the grief and the disaster of the coronavirus. But then at the other end, there's this, as you were saying, this forced growth, this forced change, and making the best of things. So it's interesting as well to look at how the job market is responding to that, how industry is responding, how the NHS magically, almost overnight, made it more possible for certain doctors to work from home, like GPs and radiologists. And that was an issue they've been dragging their feet on for years. And then just like that, it happened. And also how people in certain sectors, are having to change careers because they literally have no choice now. And I saw something interesting on LinkedIn the other day. It was something about hiring pilots, and this post was encouraging firms to think about hiring pilots because of their work ethic and their transferable skills. And it's something that I personally, this idea, I've always advocated for that. I absolutely hate it. It's a kind of pet peeve of mine, when firms put everything on experience. All the emphasis is on how much time you've done in the industry, as opposed to things like character and curiosity and creativity and fit. Because because just because someone's been in the field for 10 years, it doesn't mean they can play the game, right?
No, sure, and I think some of the sort of traits that you were talking about around curiosity and sort of problem solving and working with others, etc. I think, in a way, almost strangely, with sort of the advancements in technology and AI and robotics and etc. So I think thinking about sort of what are the skills that are going to be important going forward, I think those sort of skills that are more towards sort of creative side are going to be, so I think, I personally think, are going to be increasingly important skills to develop, and those will be skills that people, the employers of the future, will be looking more and more for, because I think it's going to be more around environments where there's going to be a lot of complexity, a lot of unknowns, and a lot of change, and there's going to be certain traits and certain types of people that actually thrive in that environment, where they feel comfortable, or more comfortable operating in those environments, and those environments are going to be more and more common. So yeah, that's a sort of an interesting observation, and I think something that I think and I've seen as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, just from your perspective in your industry, how is this interruption impacting, the way that you're working, the way that people around you are working, and really the way that your firm is sort of considering moving forward?
Yeah, so because we're a technology firm, I mean, we've sort of fairly well set up to sort of work remotely, and be quite flexible about how we came together as a team, and did the work we did. So from that perspective, there wasn't sort of that much disruption in terms of how we work together, although there are things we need to be mindful about in terms of connection, and making sure the team works together well, etc. So and I think in the NHS, as you say, adoption has gone up. We've seen significant sort of rates of adoption, as also sort of willingness to try different things and new technology, etc. I think with those things as well, we're probably coming to a point slowly where there's been a lot of adoption, and there's a lot of new ideas and new solutions. But I think it's almost like a point where the NHS is coming to a point where it's going to sort of do some reflection on its own, in terms of organizations within it, to sort of figure out, okay, a lot has changed. There's sort of how patients and service users think about what they think of as a health service, and or what they want to have at and what point in terms of being able to access services, or being able to get something done within a hospital, to how, as you say, how clinicians work. And that's another big area we're seeing a change in terms of how clinicians are sort of looking at how they work, and how they could work, and how they could deliver care to the patients they look after. But I think also on the flip side of that, there has been a lot of change, and there has been a lot of adoption. There's lots of new systems, and I think there will be a sort of almost a natural pause, and a point of reflection, where people have to sort of think about, okay, there's a lot of stuff going on, but how do we sort of now take the next more considered step, if that's the right word, in terms of how to make all of this good stuff that's happened sustainable, and make sure that we balance out any risks of actually changing too fast. So I think it is sort of a point of sort of a slight pause. I think it is just almost what's required, and then sort of really think about, okay, what's all the good stuff that's happened, what else do some of the risks that are around, and how do we put everything together, and build some do it in a sustainable way, in terms of the solutions, the underlying workflow of how clinicians work, etc., and really make the best of the opportunity.
No, it's interesting you talking about this concept of pause, because it is so necessary. You're absolutely right. You do need to take that step back and reflect in response to some kind of interruption. That's important, and I like what you're saying about this idea of changing too fast, and moving too fast, and not going in the right ways. Because it's something that I see a lot in my coaching practice with doctors who want to leave medicine. I often get people coming to me saying that I need to know what I'm going to be doing. You know, I need to have the perfect job lined up, and I need to have a plan for the next 5-10 years, and it's really stressing me out not knowing that. And people will ask me things like, what's the career progression like in my field? And it's funny answering that question and saying, you know, that there really isn't one. You know, in medicine, we're so used to this hierarchical kind of conveyor belt, really, structure of our training. And so stepping away from that and having to build a career that's not, you can't see into the future. You don't have a crystal ball. You don't know what, you know, your career is going to look like in 5-10 years time. That is inherently stressful. And what I try to help people to do is just to say, look, you do need to take the pause. You do need to just stop and have that period of reflection, because going straight from a career that you're not happy with, i.e. medicine, straight into something else because you feel like you have to go straight into, you know, the perfect master's degree or the perfect job, it's not particularly, it won't necessarily mean that you'll be happy. You know, you might just be unhappy in the same ways but in a different place. So it's interesting to me to think about why we as doctors, we need to have that certainty, and the response to an interruption is to sort of immediately jump into something else without having that period of pause, you know?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know for sure, but I think some of the points you made earlier on around how medicine is structured as a career, and that it's quite, you know, well defined in terms of the different levels and how you would progress between those. So I think, you know, certainly thinking back, you know, 15 years or so, which is quite a long time. Yeah, I mean, I think at that time, you know, you do think, okay, this is how things go, and you can plan out, because, you know, if you choose to go into this specialty, you know, okay, you have to do your specialty training for X number of years. You probably have to do a, you know, MD in the middle or PhD. You know, I think it's fairly well defined. So I think that sort of expectation and almost conditioning that you have when you train within medicine is that, you know, you do want some certainty, and it's, you know, it's hard, I think, and I found it very difficult initially to sort of think about, okay, you know, or what might happen in 3 years, and it's you know, if it's not very well defined, then you know, it is quite scary, because, you know, when I first left, I remember it wasn't you know, it's a big decision, and it was a scary decision, because you know, I didn't really know what was out there, or, you know, whether it was going to work. So I think it is tough, and I think you do it's probably, you know, it's quite natural, I think, to sort of try to think about, okay, this is what's going to happen in 3 years, and, you know, have some certainty around that, because I think that's what medics are used to, you know. So
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I mean, I felt the same way. I found it really hard to get off that treadmill, you know. Yeah, I do think that structure of medicine, as helpful as it is, I do think it creates this sort of learned helplessness in many ways. You know, this idea that you can't possibly do without that certainty, you know, that you're dependent on the system. And I really felt like I was in a codependent relationship with the NHS in many ways, a bit like that message that was sent to me earlier by Stockholm Syndrome survivor. And I think once I'd realised that I didn't actually need to rely on the NHS, I think it opened my mind up to the things that I could learn from an interruption, you know, because I could have not done anything after that jury service, right? You know, I could have just been bored for 2 weeks, or thinking for 2 weeks, and not sent in my resignation, or not explored other opportunities as you did. But it just so happened that I was ready for that interruption. You know, I was in a place where I could accept the growth that it offered me. So I do wonder if there's an element of interruption happening to us almost at the right time, if you will.
Yeah, sure. No, I think so. And I think for me, it was also the fact that, you know, I was already thinking about it, and I think probably a year into the job was probably a good time, because I've sort of had a bit of experience and not too much experience that sort of then would have perhaps maybe biased me a little bit in terms of what the art of the possible could be. No, absolutely, and I think you have to be in the right place, and you have to be, and it has to be the sort of right sort of interruption as well, right? I think in terms of being able for you to have the opportunity to make something positive out of it. So I think timing is one, and certainly the sort of type of interruption is obviously also going to be a factor in it. Yeah, and I think sometimes thinking back about sort of some of the things that events that have happened in terms of outside of medicine for me, in terms of career wise, sometimes it is just timing, right? It's sort of bumping into that person at a conference or an event or whatever, and having a chat with them, and that turns out in 3 years time to be a really exciting opportunity. So I think in hindsight, I think having done a lot more sort of roles outside medicine, you're sort of more conscious of how important luck and timing can be sometimes, and it's about being sort of aware of these things when you say, okay, that's an opportunity, you need to do something with it. And I think if you're outside medicine, as you sort of explained earlier on, there's no real the structure is not as rigid, so you do have to be quite flexible and be willing to try different things, or sort of try something that you don't necessarily know where it's going to end up in 6 months, because that's what happens, and that's what was in front of you. So I think from that perspective as well, it sort of changes your mindset a little bit to sort of be more, I guess, receptive to interruption and opportunities or events, whatever you want to call them.
Absolutely. I completely resonate with that. I mean, I've lost count of the number of times where I've just, fallen into something by accident almost. And like you said, I've met someone at a conference or because of a mutual connection, and that's led on to amazing things. And that unpredictability really in this non-clinical career that I have is something that I felt very uncomfortable with thinking about as a doctor. I couldn't even imagine how that really worked, and it was quite stressful for me thinking that that's how things worked outside of medicine, and that's part of what made staying in medicine more attractive, because you don't have to deal with that unpredictability. And so it's really interesting what you're saying about being in the right place to accept the interruption, in terms of being in the mindset really, to allow those opportunities to come in, and to know really what opportunities to take, and what opportunities to put to one side as well. I think that's probably another important part of it, right?
Yeah, and I think that's something that you probably keep on learning as you sort of progress, and you don't always make the right decision, but I think certainly now I'm more conscious of when something is an opportunity, or where something might present an opportunity to try something, and as you say, you don't always take that opportunity up, and sometimes you take it, or sometimes you try it out and it doesn't work out. But I think it's being sort of comfortable with some of that risk, and I guess that feeling that, or that the thought that you might try something out, but it might not work, but it's fine, because there's other things that's going to come out, or there's going to be some learnings that you can take from that and apply to the next thing you try. So I think I think over the past few years, that's something that I'm more comfortable doing, in terms of being sort of more open to sort of trying new things out, and accepting that some, not all of those things will work out, and that's fine as well.
Yeah, I really like what you're saying there about accepting that risk, and also what you were saying about doing things without perhaps exactly knowing where they're going to lead you. Because that's something I think as a medic, everything you do, you can see how it fits in. Even even if you're not training for that particular specialty, you're still working towards something. Even if you have no intention of being a pediatrician, doing a pediatrics rotation as an F2, you can see where that will fit in your career. That perhaps you might do general practice and end up seeing children, and therefore it contributes to that, or it might come up in other areas as well. You understand exactly where everything has its place. Almost every part of your education feels purposeful, whereas outside of medicine, it's like you say, that there are things that don't immediately feel purposeful, that you might just do because you're interested or because it happens to be there, and you had the opportunity, so you took it. And it's only clear later, sometimes much later down the line, what the purpose of that was. I mean, I had a job in broadcasting. I worked for a company that did a tech show, and every Friday we did a tech review of the latest tech. And it was fun, it was enjoyable, but I didn't really want to be a presenter. I was thinking maybe I want to be a presenter, but eventually I thought, no, that's probably not the career for me. So I didn't know where it was going. But now, doing this show, it's completely shaped the way I do this show. It's been invaluable experience in terms of being in front of the camera, interviewing, setting all the tech up, producing, script writing, everything. It all plays into it. And so it's funny now, sort of 3 years later, to discover the purpose of that path. And as you say, it's something that we as doctors, we just don't have to do that in our medical career, do we?
No, I think not to that extent. I think there's, I think these days, I think you can have a lot more flexibility than you did in terms of being practicing clinically, as well as trying out other things. I think with the clinical entrepreneurship program, etc. I mean, I think there's more structure around other options now. But yeah, it's still I think inherent in terms of how the profession is structured, that there are structures, and there are sort of almost limitations in terms of how you would look at that. And I think that does get some time to sort of get used to something else and be comfortable with something that there isn't that structure. And I think in a way, I mean, maybe I didn't do that consciously, but I think when I initially left medicine and went into consulting, I think consulting, again, it has some structure in terms of levels, and I went into a graduate program, again, because I wanted to balance out the sort of risk versus complete unknown. So I think there's always ways that you can sort of minimize the risk and sort of make it safer for you, I guess, especially when you're initially making that change. So.
Yeah. Just to pivot a little away from that point, one thing that came to me while I was thinking about this theme of interruption was funny that you mentioned holidays earlier, because the thing that came to me was holidays and traveling, because I think, being the kind of person that I am, and also having been in that medical, high pressure, high performing environment, I always looked at holidays as purely downtime. It was a treat, or it was something that I just had to do to avoid exhaustion or burnout. But thinking more deeply about it now, I feel that traveling, even if it's just being somewhere different in the UK, it is a kind of interruption. It's taking yourself out of your day-to-day and confronting yourself with a different reality in many ways, and allowing yourself to take that step back. And perhaps it doesn't have quite the same impact as a forced interruption, but to me, I feel like there is still an element of forcing your brain to think about things in a new, different way, to think about new perspectives, as you were saying earlier. And it's funny, because I hate the few days in the lead up to a trip. I hate them. I hate packing. I hate organizing things. I hate feeling like there are all these things that I'd have to put on hold. But when I come back from a trip, and when I'm on it, I always feel so deeply refreshed. even if it wasn't a particularly relaxing trip, you know, even if it was a city break where we're really busy or something, I still feel so refreshed and energized, really, you know, mentally energized. So I think there perhaps is something there about building in points of interruption into your life. And for me, that's one of the things that's so hard about the new normal now in our post-COVID world, is that it is more difficult now to do that, to get away to a new place and to force an interruption, you know. So yeah, so it was just interesting to me to think about traveling. I don't know if you have any thoughts about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think speaking to others that have traveled, I mean, I've traveled a bit, but not necessarily extensively for sort of a period of time. But I think in a way, most people would travel because they want to some downtime or take a break. I think what I often do here, or not often, but sometimes here, is that people do travel and almost unexpectedly during travel because they've been in a different place or they've just had the sort of time away from work or whatever. They've just had some thoughts. Not they didn't plan to do that, but you know, it's being in that environment and having that time and almost being relaxed and you know, sometimes you know, ideas come and then you sort of think a little bit more about it. So it's almost like unplanned interruptions or unplanned thinking time. So people sort of do come up, make decisions or come up with ideas while they're traveling, not because they set out to do that, but I think being in that environment and being away and having a little bit of time does sort of create that environment where you know, you get ideas and you meet people and you have a chat with other people that are traveling or in a different country, and you get that different perspective, as you said. So I think traveling could work from that perspective. You know, it's almost like an unplanned thinking time. I think, but it doesn't necessarily need to be, you know, a weeks or even days. You know, sometimes that sort of thinking time could just be, you know, hours or you know, even less than that. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to go somewhere exotic. You know, it just means that you have to take yourself away from that environment. And I think it's something it depends on your personality and you know how what works for you. You know, sometimes it's just going for a walk or you know, having some time away where you know you know this is what you want to do. It's perhaps not as exciting but I think if you want to do something on a regular basis, it's hard to obviously always have that kind of extreme interruptions. So it just balance where you make time on a regular basis to sort of check in with yourself and have that little bit of time to just have a think about, you know, how things are going and whether you're happy and you know what other options you might want to explore.
Yeah, no, I really loved what you said earlier about continuous reassessment and continuously as a continuum building in those points of interruption, because yeah, you're completely right. We are always changing. The situation is always changing. It is important to always give yourself really that chance to reflect on your life, and to regularly have those kind of touch points, those touch base moments with yourself, really. So yeah, I really like that. Janak, we come to the end of the show. Thank you so much for joining me tonight. It's been absolutely wonderful to talk to you. And yeah, I hope you've enjoyed being on the show as well.
No, really, I really have, and thank you very much for having me.
No, you're very welcome. I know you're very keen to help doctors who are interested in perhaps what you do, who perhaps want to change careers. So if people want to get in touch with you, how can they do that?
Yeah, probably the best way is to just reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm pretty active on there. So yeah, if somebody wants to send me a connection request or send me a message, I'll respond on there.
Fabulous. All right, Janak, thank you again and take care.
Thanks again, Anjali. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
That was great, wasn't it? I really enjoyed that conversation, and it was just so nice to have a little something to brighten up my week after the loss of my poor cat Hermes. You can see his photo there. He's the cat looking at the camera there. So yeah, that was really nice, and thank you so much, all of you, for coming. I am back next week, and that will be on Tuesday rather than the Monday, because I have a very special guest joining me from across the pond, from Indiana, actually, in the United States. Dr. Erin Wiseman is an amazing woman. She's a physician, an entrepreneur, a life coach for doctors, and she's also the host of the very popular Doctor Me First podcast. So yeah, you can find that on Spotify or Stitcher or any other podcast platform if you're interested in listening to that before she comes on the show. I'm super excited to be talking to her next week. So yes, join us next Tuesday, August 4th, and that will be at 8 p.m. We'll be discussing the theme of exploration. So thank you again, guys. I will see you then. And for now, please take care, stay inspired, and yeah, good night. I'll speak